Right. Well, I'm the official starter. So good morning to you all. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this online webinar where we're going to have a look at the world post-COVID. And one of the astonishing things, of course, that's happened in this amazing time right now is that people are connecting like never before. We're using technology to do it, but we're actually reaching out across the world as we're doing this morning and being able to make contact with people. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Flume, on behalf of Future World International, to this seminar today. The seminar is going to be run by my colleague and partner, Anton Musgrave. He and I are both senior partners of Future World International. And I'll tell you a little bit about Future World in a moment. But first of all, I want to introduce our special friend, Khalid El Gohari. Khalid is an advisor to the Dubai Prime Minister's office, a very dear friend and somebody that I work closely with in the programs we do for the Dubai Prime Minister's office. And Khalid has very graciously agreed this morning that he will do a brief introduction. So Khalid, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Neil, for the introduction. We've been working with Neil and the rest of the team of the Future World for the last 5 years. And no matter what, happening around us in the globe, for the uncertainty that the world is facing, usually when we launch any leadership program in the UAE, we invite the team of Future World and Neil for a day at the beginning of every cohort, so we can understand what is happening globally, regionally, so the leaders can have some insights. The team, they always read and they travel the world of getting the latest stuff so we can share it with the participants, especially in uncertain world. People, they always try to understand what is happening, how they can be ready, especially leaders, how they can be ready for this kind of VUCA world. And we talk about it and we predict, we try to see what is the global trends, to foresight. But the current situation, people, they talked about it, but it tested the readiness of organization, governments and countries, And I believe, the world will come out of this situation more stronger, more ready and agile in the future for lots of things. We've been talking about, virtual work, who can imagine that the whole globe can work virtually right now? And things are still moving, and the business is moving. Yeah, of course, slow, but it proved the case that people can still work remotely and achieve stuff. So I would like to thank you all for participating in this webinar, and I don't want to take too much time, but I hope that you will enjoy the session with the team, and it will be very insightful. Thank you, Neil, for hosting me.
Thank you, Khalid. Great words indeed. And it is indeed a VUCA world. And may I say that one of the things that's been most enjoyable about working with the team in Dubai is how many governments around the world do you know that have a vision for 2071 looking forward? Nonetheless, this has caught us all by surprise. I don't think there was a government in the world that was fully prepared for what's happening right now. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in this, the first of our webinars. Hopefully there are going to be many more. We want to establish a panel of experts, a panel of participants from the UAE area who will participate with us on this journey as we go forward. And as I say, this won't be the last of these events as we explore the new normal of what the world is going to look like in the future. But with no further ado, I'd like to hand over to my colleague and partner, Anton Musgrave. Anton, I love to call him this. He's a reformed lawyer. He was head of a big legal firm for a long time, involved in the property market as well, and then ended up running a financial services company. But Anton and myself have been on the fringes of Future World for many, many years. This organization is something like 35 years old, helping leaders around the world try to understand, design, and create the future. And Anton has put together a brand new presentation for us called Ctrl+Alt+Delete, which I think is a hugely apt title for the moment. And what we're going to do, it's broken into a series of short parts. Anton will do a session for 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to have a quick Q&A session. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see on the right-hand side, there is a Q&A button. So if you have any questions, you simply tap on that button. You can type the question in. I will facilitate them and ask those questions to Anton. Alternatively, if you want to actually ask a question, you can raise your hand. There's also a button at the bottom of the screen that enables you literally or digitally rather to raise your hand, and then you can appear on screen and ask the question live. And we'll manage that between the team over here. So with no further ado, let me hand over to my friend, colleague, and partner, Mr. Anton Musgrave.
Neil, thank you very much. Folks, really great to be with you this morning. On a Monday, I think we are now at something like day 48 of a very hard national lockdown, as most of us are, I think, around the world to some extent or other. We've been saying in Future World for, as Neil has said, the past 30, 35 or so years, that the future will always surprise. And I guess none of us really imagined the extent of the surprise that would await us as we celebrated New Year's morning on January the 1st, 2020. Many people have said, you know, the whole year has happened almost in the first month or two, or 10 years of experience almost has happened in the first month or two. Really crazy indeed. When we were thinking of a topic for this conversation, we thought of the word Ctrl+Alt+Delete. And I was just reminded that someone on our team said, Anton, you have to be over 50 to understand what Ctrl+Alt+Delete means. And those of us that are over 50 will remember that when everything sort of shuts down and freezes in front of you on your laptop, you have to put Ctrl+Alt+Delete to reboot the system. And so here we are, folks, in May 2020, facing a world where the entire global system as we know it needs a reboot. So to talk about how we need to think about the world post-COVID, we've broken our session, as Neil has said, into 5 small sections. And we'll cover each of these in 10 or 12 minutes or so, and then let's have a debate around that particular theme, and then we'll greet and have another conversation as we get towards the end. So the first piece, you know, to think about is the fact that every single thing we understand and know about the world has changed as a consequence of something which we can't even see. We know it's out there, we know that it's all around us, we breathe it, we touch it, but it's invisible to all of us, and it's fundamentally changed everything in the world. I mean, who would have thought not long ago that oil would be worth less than $1 or less than $0 a barrel, in fact? Now, as Neil has said, you know, the UAE have a plan for 2070, and somewhere in the past, I'm sure this conversation was had to say what happens in a world post fossil fuels and carbon energy. And so that part of the world has embarked on a very long-term strategy that I'm sure will pay massive dividends. But for the rest of the world, this was an unthinkable moment, an unthinkable possibility. If we think about how many millions of people in the world will have suddenly become and will still become unemployed, tragic human consequences. We've been talking about, you know, the 4th industrial revolution and its impact on jobs for a while now, but this is again an event from completely left field that will change the world of work, the world of business. Indeed, I think it will change the concept of what it means to be relevant as a human being. Relevance in the industrial area was defined by where you go at 8 o'clock and where you leave from at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And so what does it mean to be a relevant participant in the world of life and humanity in the future? And I suspect that it will be redefined and it will change. If you think about the impact of this era on the stock markets of the world, it's the most fundamental reset that world economies have had in over 300 years. None of the past global crises have inflicted anywhere near as much pain on the system that we have become so accustomed to, so used to, the system in which we have run our businesses and our organizations. So it's no surprise then that The Economist had this fairly dramatic image on their cover recently. The world, folks, as we know it, is indeed closed. And in that world, it's really important for us to press pause, reflect, and think about what it is that we want to refill our diaries with, refill our lives with. How do we stay relevant as an organization when the world gradually starts opening up? And so our first vignette this morning is to think about and talk about how important is it for any organization, indeed for every individual, to have a reason for existing. I often ask clients the challenging question. I say, if your business was vaporized this morning, what would your customers, what would the world, in fact, miss about you? And very often it's not about the product. Very often also, when you ask a team of executives from one company to write down their purpose, in other words, the reason for that company existing, just on a little yellow sticky note, you have 10 executives around the boardroom table, ask each one to write down why your company exists or what will the world miss about your organization. Most times, 9 times out of 10 executives around a room, and you get 9 different answers. That has massive consequences in a world where we are going to reset and will have to reimagine why it is we exist. Now, Jack Ma of Alibaba, one of my favorite people, we all know who he is and what he's achieved. He applied for 35 jobs, got turned down by all of them, started a small software business, and we all know how powerful and important Alibaba has become in the world of business. And Jack Ma says technology can do amazing things, but it's not the technology that changes the future. So we have AI, we have machine learning, we have Internet of Things, we have, smart systems, et cetera, and that's all great. But the thing that really changes the future, folks, is the power and the clarity of the dreams that leaders have for themselves, for their people, for their customers, for their organizations, indeed for their countries. It's also interesting at the same time, we've all noticed in the financial press over the last year or so, increasing frequency of conversations and articles that suggest that an age-old truism in the world of corporate life, namely that the company is there for the benefit of shareholder value creation, that is no longer blindly bought into by everyone in the system. When Jamie Dimon, who leads a group of 250-odd senior executives in the Western world, says that the role of companies now is much broader than simply stakeholder value, then we sense again something has been shifting for a while. So we've been talking about conscious capitalism, stakeholder capitalism, equitable distribution, et cetera, and equity in the system. And that conversation's been gaining in amplitude, but suddenly along comes the new post-COVID world, and I suspect we're going to be rethinking exactly what it means for organizations to survive in this world. And so, apologies, when you think about this future, folks, and you think about the power of having a story to tell the world that rallies the entire world behind your story, the power of your stated purpose is unimaginably exponential. I'm sure you all know the story. It's a wonderful story of Captain Tom Moore, a man of almost 100 years of age, when he set about telling the world that he wanted to raise £1,000 for the NHS in Britain by walking around his house or up and down the walkway in front of his home with his walker, literally his Zimmer frame. But the story that he told around his purpose resonated with the whole world. And in a few short weeks, this 100-year-old man raised over £35 million for the NHS. The power of telling a story that resonates with the hearts and minds of all people, even outside your immediate client base, your immediate country of operation. But when people really buy into why it is you exist, what it is you're trying to do and shape and improve in the world, the support for organizations is absolutely exponential. And so when you think about Eliud Kipchoge, who achieved something that no person had ever achieved in the world of sport, he'd run a mile in under 2 minutes. And he tells an incredible story about surrounding yourself with amazing people, of having this powerful dream to shatter all the preconceived notions of what was possible. It was thought impossible for the human body to perform at this level. And he proved that with belief in what it is you want to achieve, the unstoppable desire to go and do whatever it takes, and then the passion, the heart, the drive to bring people around your cause is absolutely makes the human spirit indomitable and unstoppable. And I think in a world which is facing a complete reset of all the fundamental rules of business, it's going to become increasingly powerful for organizations, for your business, to understand exactly what that value proposition is, to unite your people around that story, and then to unleash the unexpected exponential impact and consequence of that belief in your marketplaces around the world. So I think, folks, we'll see that all of us will have to redefine our story of why we're relevant, of why we deserve a place in the sun in this new post-COVID-19 world. If we get that right, your business faces exponential upside and brand new massive opportunity. I'm going to pause there. I'd love to take any questions that you may have on this really important starting point for Ctrl+Alt+Deleting the world of business as we know it in the future.
Thank you,
Any
Anton.
questions coming in, Neil?
And not yet. There's no questions yet. So folks, remember the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen on the right. If you click on that and simply type your questions. But Anton, while we're waiting, I'd like to ask a question. You and I both deal extensively with businesses. That's what we do. We work with leadership around the world. And the message we're getting from so many of our clients right now is that, yes, of course, we believe in relevance, we believe in purpose, but right now it's heads down and survival. How do you balance the demand for survival in a time of crisis like this with a long-term view of a purpose? How do you balance those two?
Yeah, I think it's an absolutely fair reaction. One has to understand the shock to the system of any business, no matter what size, no matter what industry. The shock has been absolutely profound, and it's been inflicted over a very short space of time. So I completely understand the dilemma that leaders face. And so it's correct that the short-term focus absolutely has to be stop the cash bleed, shore up the balance sheet, win shareholder and board support, get your people on board, care about your people, understand the challenges they're going through as they're trying to work from home, coping with competing demands from young children with homeschooling to just the process of running a home, and of course trying to survive as an organization. That I completely understand. But true leadership will know that after the short-term crisis plan has been put in place, and we've now been going for 3 or 4 months in some countries with the COVID crisis, the time must now come for leadership to raise their minds, raise their perspective, peer over the edge of the impossible, and try and think about and explore what's coming over the horizon. And in that new context in which business takes place, what is it that they're going to hitch their star to? What is that story that's going to make the world stood up and take notice? And it's really fascinating, Neil, when you look at some companies like Disney, for example, one of the most loved brands on the planet almost. What they did was retrenched over 100,000 people in order to shore up the dividend which they paid to shareholders. I wonder how the world will judge them 3 years from now, when we look back and say, what did organizations do to look after people, build a powerful purpose, and create alignment around their cause way beyond just the scope of their immediate marketplace? It's those kind of companies, I think, that are going to win global recognition and support as we reset everything we thought was normal in this new world.
You've touched on the concept of people a couple of times, and that seems to be one of the big trends that's emerging from this crisis right now, that yes, profits are, we all believe in capitalism, profits are important, but at the end of the day, it's about people. Is that really a fundamental change you think is happening?
Neil, I think in the world of what I would sometimes call greedy capitalism, I think people have almost taken sort of the back seat to this endless pursuit of short-term profits, where the investors that have taken, put real money into an organization have taken the vast majority of the spoils. I think around the world, executive leadership have ensured that their pension funds have done really, really well. And in many organizations, I think the focus on people has taken a back seat. I mean, I'm curious that even today still, the concept of customer centricity is spoken of with such passion. But yet when you phone the call center says, "Dear valued customer, we appreciate your call and value your support," and then keep you on a call center line for 5 or 10 minutes. Yeah. It just shows me that we haven't really thought through what is that humanness, that connection. How do we improve that? How do we really put that at the core of what we do and how we think about our business and the role that people play in that ecosystem of business? If you take even the rollout of COVID, how organizations have struggled really to look after the immediate needs of their people beyond just issuing them all with laptops and data connections. how many leaders have really sat down and had deep conversations in the leadership team about the human consequences of people trying to work from a small apartment which they share with 3 other young people in the center of London or New York or Paris or anywhere else for that matter?
Yeah, somebody once said to me that we have to understand that profit is not a purpose. Profit is simply an outcome of a great purpose. Anton, we have a question coming in here, a good one. How do leaders get staff to buy into the concept of purpose when they're worried about losing their jobs?
Yeah, I think that's a deeply important question, and it's not necessarily an easy one to answer, Neil. My sense is that if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, obviously, one of the most fundamental concerns we all have as human beings is our immediate personal health and welfare. And so leaders really do need to take every step they possibly can to assuage the concerns that individual employees have. But leaders are not magicians. At the end of the day, there are stark financial realities. I think what employees and what staff really need to have is access to real information that's offered with empathy, authentically, and with full transparency. And I think very few employees will not accept the realities of the current crisis if they're given that empathetic, transparent, full information-based answers to some of their basic questions in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But we also know, and the research is really powerful, Neil, that most employees perform way better, are way more loyal and way more aligned and therefore way more effective when they, at a personal level, can connect with the aspirations and ambitions and purpose statement of an organization. And especially when you look at younger generations and they're rapidly taking over the majority of jobs in the workforce around the world, the research says that when they align with the purpose statement of an organization, they worry far less about money. Yeah. Now, I agree that comes after you've paid the rent and after you've paid basic provisions in your kitchen, et cetera, et cetera. But unless you have that coupled with this sharing information honestly in an aligned fashion, you can't succeed in this new world. So the fundamental error companies are making is not to share the reality with their staff, but also not to excite them about what lies beyond this crisis. To get them to understand that this is a journey, they're part of it, and they individually can make a difference around something which they can believe in because it's real and powerful.
And of course, it's not just companies. We're seeing countries that are completely mishandling the crisis, mainly because of false information. But Anton, one more quick question before we move on to the next session. A number of countries like UK, USA, for example, the concept of remote working, the concept of online commerce was already well established. Do you feel that some countries are suffering more than others because digital infrastructure has not yet been adequately implemented, or companies are still working in the old-fashioned way?
Neil, absolutely. There's no question about that. But the flip side of that, on a positive note, is that what this has forced countries and companies to do is to probably do 3 years of tech development and enhancement in the space of only a couple of months. Yeah. No doubt there's some countries that still lag behind others in terms of connectivity, bandwidth, speed, accessibility, et cetera, et cetera. But again, the good news is that in the space of a short, and I used to say 3 to 5 years, and I'm now going to sort of pin my story to the mast and say in the next 12 to 24 months, almost every person on this planet will have access to high-speed digital connectivity with data at an affordable cost, if not for free. We've seen the massive escalation in the satellites that Elon Musk, for example, is pumping into the atmosphere to give global digital connectivity via satellite access to every person on the planet. I think what COVID is going to do is accelerate that entire process by an order of magnitude. In our own country, which is probably the second highest data cost in the world, suddenly over the last 3 months, we've seen data become almost a basic human right. And the Competition Commission in our country has forced the operators to slash their data costs. Still not low enough, but it's a downward trend that's only going to accelerate, I believe, in the really short term.
Absolutely. That's a great point to move on to the concept of relevance. Anton, your next slide is about how do we remain relevant after the COVID has finally disappeared. So please, the screen is back to you.
Thank you very much, Neil. So there we are, folks, the image of the world as we know it absolutely exploding. And think about how does an organization, and again, at a personal level, how do you as a leader stay relevant when all the rules as we know them have been shattered? It's really interesting. I read an article in the Financial Times of London this morning that Warren Buffett has said, you know, for many years now, he's believed in value investing. Now, the concept of value investing is you buy shares in a company, A, with good leadership, and B, that's undervalued. It's a solid underlying business model, but the marketplace simply doesn't rate the organization. It's undervalued. And so you invest in that company and hope the leadership can then elevate the market value to what the intrinsic value of the organization is. And Warren Buffett has just acknowledged that perhaps value investing finally in the post-COVID world will have to radically change, maybe even disappear. And so you'll also have read that he's disinvested, you know, all his shares in the airline industry, for example, because he just doesn't see that concept of value actually re-emerging as a relevant future business model. And so beyond the immediate survival requirements of any organization, and I think that is probably 6 to 9 months of effort and initiative and focus, beyond that, we have to rebuild what our organizations look like and how we operate to have a chance of being relevant in this new organization, in this new world of different organizations. And what do I mean by rebuild? First of all, I think organizations have to understand that absolutely everything that can be automated should be, and everything that can be digitized should be. And that doesn't mean simply digitizing all existing processes. What it means is in your organization, as you rebuild your foundation for this future relevance, you have to rethink absolutely every process in your entire organization from scratch, from start. Does this process add significant value to the customer at the end of the day? Does it enhance the customer experience? Does it enhance the customer's willingness to pay me a premium for what I'm delivering? And does it make me relevant in this new world? And then, having rebuilt the foundation of your organization from a technology perspective, from an operations perspective, from a supply chain perspective, and most importantly, how are you equipping your people to stay relevant in this new post-COVID world? What are your learning and development programs? What kind of people are you employing? What are the skills and attributes they need to have? All of this is part of creating your new foundation. That's probably an 18-month to 24-month process. And then at the end of that, and towards the end of that, one has to now think about how do I now ramp up and exponentially grow my organization and my business in this brand new world where the rules have all changed. Of course, context becomes crucially important. It's really important for you to understand what does the landscape of business look like into which we are rapidly moving. And in that new landscape, where are we looking for new solutions? What are the questions we're asking ourselves? And are we focusing fundamentally on the right things in the future? Now this, you know, being in South Africa and loving safaris is a fascinating story. And it really just indicates that we tend to often to focus on issues that are no longer relevant. There are dangers behind us, there are opportunities all around us, but are we really looking at them in the right way and asking ourselves the correct questions about where our business is headed and what will the market space look like in 3 to 5 years from now? Imagine, folks, a world where we're never ever offline. In fact, my generation of baby boomers will be the last generation that understands what it means to be offline. Everyone else will be connected all the time. And of course, there are privacy issues, and of course, there's control issues around the world. But what we've seen with COVID is that when it comes to something important that people understand and believe in, they will sacrifice their freedom to get protection from, in this case, the virus. Imagine a world, folks, where humans are augmented to the point of Sophia, the robot who can speak like a human, in fact, was given citizenship of Saudi after she presented at a conference about 1.5 years or 2 years ago. Imagine a world, folks, where machines are so smart that they sit with us around our boardroom tables. They remember every budget, every strategy, every competitor analysis all the time with no failure in their memory. The question we need to reflect on is, what will make me as a CEO and as a leader relevant in that world and around that boardroom table. So we have CRISPR technology, we have gene editing technology, we have quantum computing just around the corner. It will be, commoditized to a level where we can all tap into its power in the next year, 2, 3 at the most. In that world, how will we edit human beings to stay relevant in a world of increasingly smarter machines? For me, we have to embrace these enhancements, but we also have to elevate what it means to be really human and what is intrinsically different about being a human, and unleash that value proposition into the world. And so if you think about the world, folks, where all the rules of engagement of business, of technology, of ecosystems, this world of supply chains, absolutely everything about your business has changed in the last few months. If you just think about how trade has been disrupted because of the closure of sea lanes and airports around the world, suddenly organizations are having to rethink how they understood the resilience in their business ecosystem. Countries have had to examine, how do we build resilience of a country where our food chain is independent of the rest of the world, where we can provide our basic requirements without having to rely on a ship or an aircraft bringing freight in from a part of the world. Of course, this talks to the future of geopolitics in the world. Where will power reside? Which parts of the world will be relevant? And I think what we're seeing in the world right now, as a consequence of this shift alone, is that there's a huge lack of powerful, aligned leadership in the world of governments that are saying, let's have this new conversation about what an ideal future world should look like and how companies and countries can operate in that world. Some leaders are beginning to have that. Emmanuel Macron is one of those. Sadly, not many others are yet having these conversations. Think about the second order implications. We've spoken already this morning about working from home and all of the practical personal consequences that has introduced into all of our lives. Personally, I have to tell you, I've discovered things about lawnmowers and vacuum cleaners and pumps outside in irrigation systems that I never even knew existed. But what is the second order implication, excuse me, of all of that? Well, the obvious one, I guess, that's a first order implication is what's the future of real estate? We all think that offices will no longer be the investment of choice as organizations downscale, work remotely, etc. But a second order implication is the consequence for global pension funds into which you and I invest all of our pension savings, our retirement savings. They have always loved property investments because of their steady, stable cash flow, which they match to their actuarial outflows based on pension fund claims. That whole formula has just been shattered. Think of the trillions of dollars invested in massive retail outlets, shopping centers. What are the second and third order implications when people no longer want to aggregate in shopping centers in the way they have? How will we socialize? Where will we socialize? What will all those new shifts mean for the world of business as we know it? And so, folks, it's not untrue that we have to completely rewire our brains. We have to rewire how we process information, how we connect dots. We have to ensure that we read different stories, different articles, different research papers, different magazines to get new signals about what this future stage in which we operate business really will look like. And the one thing that we need to bear in mind is that our past expertise in our industries is becoming less and less relevant. Elon Musk has shown us, and we may not enjoy him, we may not agree with what he's named his new child, etc., which is an unpronounceable name. But what he does show us so powerfully is that being constrained by the way you've always thought in an industry is no longer appropriate in this rapidly changing world. He has redefined the rules in any number of industries by thinking about the future through first principles. What will that future look like? How can I change the rules that I've always thought were sacrosanct? If we simply take communication, we've all spoken about 5G and the fact that it's 10 times faster than 4G, etc., etc. Again, what is the second order implication of everyone on the planet in the next 2 or 3 years having access to 5G, in other words, real-time, zero latency data connectivity and data flow? Anyone want to think what the fastest growing sport is in the world? Anyone on the chat would like to suggest what is the fastest growing sport in the world? Or unmute your mic and let's hear it. Anybody out there? Any answers? No guesses? Okay, so I'll not keep you in suspense much longer. Folks, the fastest growing sport in the world right now is nothing other than e-gaming.
I'm happy to say we had a couple of delegates getting it right, Anton.
Okay, fantastic.
We had gaming, esports, gaming, competitive computer games, esports. So I think the message has sunk home.
There we go. So a fascinating second order implication, which in itself will have many other implications, not only from a betting point of view, but think about this. I'm working with the life sciences division of a multinational global corporation in the FMCG space, in the food space. And they have a research team right now that is investigating what are the nutritional requirements of top esports participants. So really interesting consequences to something like this. And these are the consequences we need to think about. At the same time, folks, we've all read the stories. We understand the momentum being gained in the conversations around all industries, around going green. How do we build environmentally sustainable business models? And of course, the new latest word doing the rounds is, and there's no pun intended, the circular economy. So in your organization, think about your entire ecosystem, everything in your value chain, which is an old industrial age word, in your business. How do you think about that through the green circular economy lens? How do we change absolutely everything? So we've got this huge technology change requirement. We've got a big change around people. We've got a big change around carbon energy disappearing. And we've got a big change around the circular economy. If you think about that image I showed earlier, the world absolutely exploding. We talk about colliding worlds, the collisions between the old world that we knew in carbon energy, linear has shifted towards exponential. So many parts of that world are simply changing. And if that's true, if that's even half true, folks, how many of the core assumptions that drive your business today, drive your balance sheet today, drive your profit and loss statement today, how many of those assumptions still remain valid in the world of 2025? What I suggest each of us should do is write down on a piece of paper the top 5 assumptions that drive your P&L and your business model. And then have a conversation with your executive teams to say, how many of these still stay relevant and valid in the world of 2025? The world 5 years after all the rules had changed. Let's pause there, folks, and take questions, and then we'll understand a bit more about how we measure success in this new relevance in the post-COVID world. So
Thank you,
questions
Anton.
around business relevance.
Yeah, I think that concept of toxic assumptions is such a powerful one. And to me, it relates directly to what you said about the circular economy and the green economy. So many companies have been paying lip service to the environmental issues. But it was fascinating to see that just before Davos this year, the World Economic Forum came out with its matrix of risks to the world. And the top 5 risks, sadly, they didn't have a pandemic as one of their top 5, but it was very close to the top. The top 5 risks were all related to environmental issues. And yet, we've kind of brushed those things aside as something the next generation will deal with. I don't think we're going to be able to do that as we go forward.
I think you're absolutely right, Neil. What we've also seen in the last year or 18 months is the enormous, and again, that word exponential comes to mind, the power of the individual citizen. And I guess the story that brings it most to mind is young Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old kid with Asperger's disease. 1 year ago was in the front of her school protesting her view of, climate and the environment in the world. And 1 year later, she was addressing literally hundreds of thousands of people in Central Park in New York. And that just illustrates for me, again, this change that I think many leaders in the world and many governments have underestimated, is the technological ability through all the social media communication platforms, but the willingness of people now at an individual level to aggregate around issues which they feel very strongly about. And of course, in a post-COVID world, as countries have raced to have apps, as they do in China, that, that tap into all your contacts. And if you're searching on Google for, COVID treatment and some of your friends have got it, the app will glow red on your screen. And if you stop at a police roadblock, it will show red, and which means you're not allowed to actually leave your home. Countries have rushed to embrace the technology to try and contain the spread. But at the same time, civilians have relinquished a lot of personal freedoms. And I think in the next 6 months, we'll see society again beginning to say, hang on a moment, do I believe in this? Is it fair? Is it real? Is it something that I want to see as part of my future? And if the answer is negative, the similar uprising, I think, will be felt across the world, across many of these questions.
Well, history sadly tells us that when governments take power, they're very reluctant to give it up. But that takes us to a very interesting question that we've had posed here. And it relates exactly to what you've said, that, the technology is one of the things that's changing the world. We're all connected. What we're doing right now, the fact that we're all sitting around different parts of the world talking to each other. What about the risk to security in business? Cybercrime, people are now online, they're sitting at home, they're connecting in ways that they never had before. We had a situation in the South African Parliament just the other day where in the midst of a Zoom meeting, suddenly pornographic images were downloaded. I think they called it Zoom bombing. What about the risk to security from this connected world that we're living in?
Yeah, Neil, I mean, I think you're absolutely right on that. I think it's a reality that we face in the world. The truth of it is, though, we can't go back to the paper world. None of us, I think, are ever going to go back and write a check or take out a quill pen and post a letter to a loved one on the other side of the world. So it's a very practical reality that we all need to understand. And again, I think if you take the Zoom example, I mean, they underestimated the importance of this. They underestimate, and maybe even they've always had the technological security levels which the world has required, but never spoke about it, never saw that as an important dimension of their value proposition, of their brand positioning in the marketplace, maybe not even of their purpose, if you like. And if they had realized that, maybe they would have made much more story of it, or they would have enhanced the technological levels of security timeously so that they weren't caught on the left foot as this massive spike in the use of Zoom as a platform has hit the world. And again, maybe a classic example of an organization not thinking through the second and third order implications of a fundamental shift in how business and the doing of business has changed in only just a few short months. So technological security, cybersecurity, it's a reality. It's not going to go away. And it forces governments and organizations to really enhance the investment in thinking through what does a virtual world really look like and what are its fundamental requirements to operate safely and securely. Of course, what this also means is, who do we entrust with writing the standards of security in the world? Do we trust the United Nations? Do we trust the World Bank? Is it the EU, et cetera, et cetera? So maybe we are realizing that many of these post-Second World War institutions, which were created to regulate the world and how the world engages and interrelates, maybe they themselves are losing relevance in this new world. And maybe we now need a new global cybersecurity council. How will that operate? Who will we trust to be on that council? And how will they then maybe participate in regulating what is now, again, a basic facet of business, which I don't think is going to disappear.
And I think an important point that emerges from this is the role of business in reshaping the world. A couple of years ago, we had a discussion relating to Africa and perhaps governments that are not quite as transparent as in many other parts of the world. And the hypothesis was put forward that rather than a group of government leaders taking control, maybe a group of business leaders should get together and say to those governments that are not behaving particularly well, if you want our economic activity, these are the rules you need to apply from. So I think part of the recalibration of the world after COVID is going to be that business is going to take on increased relevance.
Neil, I couldn't agree with you more, and I must just pause and say, and I'm very proud that you used my favorite word.
We call him Mr. Recalibrate. That is Anton's favorite word, yeah.
But the truth of it is, Neil, that yes, I think leaders are going to have to step up to the plate on a much wider array of issues than ever before. Leaders of significant organizations can no longer simply focus down narrowly on their business. In this new world, I think the role of collaboration is becoming much, much more important. And so in the old world, it might have been true that you could delegate some part of your life, if you like, to a government department or a business or a company or a chief financial officer, etc. I think in this new world, collaboration between all the components in the ecosystem becomes crucially important. What's interesting from a pure business point of view, though, is when you start engaging not only with your customers or not only with your suppliers, but you bring your suppliers and customers and your own teams together in a coordinated set of conversations around A, what's important, B, what's valuable, C, how can we innovate together for our mutual benefit, then very exciting ideas and opportunities emerge. And I think that concept taken to a global stage is such a powerful one. The difficulty is right now, every country almost is trying to survive COVID, is looking inwardly to see how can we protect ourselves from this external threat. And no one yet is overtly, other than Macron perhaps, is actually saying, hang on a moment, how do we all collaborate better? Will we see a fragmentation of the EU into, again, separate states with border control? Or will the EU press pause and say, how do we create a United States of Europe? How do we actually take the concept of the European Union beyond just a trade and movement of people collaboration, but integrate deeply from a legal and from a fiscal financial point of view? What does that mean for trade blocs around the world, where different parts of the world collaborate and create rules to enhance collaboration, cooperation, integration, and yet provide the levels of safety and security which the world has now discovered have become so important?
Let me toss you a quick curved ball. You talk about collaboration, and I know this is one of the things that Jack Ma also has said. The role of women, they seem to be much better at collaborating, communicating than men who have a language of warfare and penetration and domination. The role of women in the changing world. Then I have two questions from the panelists.
It's one of my favorite questions to answer, Neil, because if you look at, and you've alluded to it, what is the language of business in the old world? It's all about market domination, kill the competitor, own the customer, the language of warfare. And warfare is being conducted through hierarchies, which are mostly filled up with men, if you like. If you think about the language of the future, which is around the green circular economy, which is all about sustainability, it's about life, it's about mutual interdependence. It's about the world is becoming less reductionist and logical, and it's becoming much more important to synthesize often very confusing and conflicting signals. But how do we synthesize them and simplify that insight into a powerful message, either for our people, for our board, for our shareholders, for the marketplace, or for the world as a whole? And those skills and attributes are much more feminine, if you like. The language of the future has a much more feminine language. Interesting that a number of countries right now that are fighting COVID more successfully have women leaders. I think the woman leader at the moment that stands out for many of us is Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who seems to be doing so much right. And it's staggering. I mean, she's 36 years old. Has very limited political experience, if you like, but just intuitively knows what to do when to unleash, again, exponential power. If you think about the value she created, the alignment she created in New Zealand when she hugged the woman after the Christchurch massacre, I mean, how many other leaders in the world do we know that in the last few years have created anywhere near that level of almost global recognition, but certainly in-country impact that brought everyone from all persuasions, all religions together in New Zealand? And all it took, Neil, was one hug for just a few seconds. And it's that intuitive insight that is delivered in a very simple action that unleashes exponential power, I think is a feature of this new world.
Let's take it right back to business. We have a question from one of our delegates. What is the bare minimum that a business must start looking at now in terms of preparing for a digital business post-COVID? What are the bare minimum steps that we have to take right now?
I think what we've learned in the last few weeks is that unless you have multiple ways of reaching your customers, the people that pay you, in terms of your messaging, in terms of your product, in terms of accessibility, and in terms of ability to actually buy what it is you do, unless you have multiple channels of developing that engagement model, you're going to be caught short. Again, it's not one or the other. It's all of the above. And so what so many small businesses and large businesses, I mean, in South Africa right now, the largest retailer that we all buy our food from, a company called Woolworths, for example, absolutely massive, successful, dominant. What they've discovered is in the post-COVID world is the entire physical model was inaccessible. And they've been caught really short on executing and giving their marketplace digital access. So from online ordering to fulfillment, etc., the management of their supply chain, they've had to rethink absolutely everything, and they've had to do it under massive pressure in a short space of time. What was really interesting in Australia, Woolworths have an operation. They're not related, interestingly, but the CEO of Woolworths Australia, when Qantas announced the retrenchment or the furloughing of thousands of employees, I think 7,000 employees, the CEO of Woolworths Australia said to them, I will employ every single Qantas person that's been retrenched or furloughed immediately in Woolworths to help us build an execution capability in a digital world. We'll get these thousands of people into all of our stores around Australia. They will pack the bags of goodies that have been ordered online at night, so that at 8 o'clock every morning they can all be dispatched and we can clear the digital order book, and they will then repack the shelves before 9 a.m. so that when the physical part of our retail operation opens at 9 o'clock in the morning, the shelves are restocked for those customers willing to come into the store. So radical breakthrough thinking, immediate execution, brilliant insight. Of course, it's created goodwill across Australia that's almost unimaginable. But I think, to me, to come back to the question, Neil, very simply, it's what is your multiple elements of your market engagement strategy. Digital clearly has to be at a core of that. Secondly, what you need to do immediately is make sure that all of your people, and again, it's stating the obvious, but are all of your people digitally competent? So what are the skills you need to be helping your people develop? And then how do you equip them with literally the hardware to do that? The next level, of course, is making sure that your people stay engaged, stay motivated, stay aligned. I mean, what we've seen in our business deal, and you'll know this, is that people are very happy working remotely. But increasingly, our people are saying, but we do miss the human connection. So what is that new model? That how do you build human connection digitally or virtually? And then when and how do you engage physically when we reach the time when that is going to be legal again? Will that again be pumping 7,000 people up a bank of 10 elevators into a 40-story building? Or will the model be completely different? So number one, understand how you engage your marketplace no matter what circumstances the world throws at you. And B, make sure that your systems, your processes, and your people are competent to excite customers in that context. I think what we must also realize is that we're now talking about a post-COVID-19 world. We will learn much, but will it prepare us for a post-COVID-20 and a post-COVID-21 world? Will it prepare us to be relevant and successful in a world where there are increasingly significant environmental disasters? They will be coming. So how do we build resilience into our entire business engagement model?
And I think in the short term, the line between success and failure is going to be businesses that are simply putting their heads down in the bunker and focusing on survival. And those are saying we have to survive, but what comes afterwards?
Absolutely.
That looking beyond that becomes critical, which I think
Absolutely.
takes us neatly to exactly the question that many people are asking, post-COVID success metrics. Anton, why don't you go ahead with your next session?
Thanks very much, Neil. So folks, if you think about the world of business, how we've typically measured success in the old world, in that industrial age world that we've come from, is, first of all, if you're a listed entity, it's market capitalization. In other words, what is the market, the investors of the world, what value do they ascribe to you and your team's ability to create value not only now, today on your balance sheet, but also into the future. We've been governed to a large extent by Wall Street. Wall Street, as we know, is triggered by analysts. And my favorite story is, analysts are kind of the scourge almost of capitalism, because they're very often young 28-year-old Excel gurus that have never hired or fired a person, and yet their analysis of our companies dictate what CEOs do and don't do to create that quarterly earnings forecast that satisfies these young equity analysts around the world. And so many of the success metrics in the old world around the capital markets has really been driven by quantitative analytics about free cash flow, market cap, number of sales, number of employees, assets, hard assets, tangible, measurable assets on the balance sheet, etc. And the question really is, will that be the way we measure success in the future? Of course, again, at a personal level, how have individual leaders been rated? Well, they've largely been rated by their ability to grow shareholder value. It's indeed the way they measure themselves because of their share options and the value of those shares when they retire or cash out and move on. But I think the world is beginning to ask different questions of business and of leaders. There's, as we know, many questions being asked around, is the traditional value proposition of any company, is that still relevant in the marketplace today? Do we, and some companies, for example, have stopped selling an asset simply for the production cost of that asset plus a margin? Companies like Boeing stopped selling jet engines, based on the production cost plus a margin a long time ago. Their value proposition shifted to selling safe flying hours. In other words, a closer alignment between the interests of the customer and of the manufacturer. Increasingly, companies are realizing that they are going to have to play a much more important role in the ongoing welfare, well beyond merely financial welfare of their employees. Much has been written at the moment around Amazon, for example, one of the largest, most valuable corporates on the planet, and how they engage and look after their staff, particularly in all their warehouse and distribution centers around the world. It doesn't seem to have deterred the investors in Amazon yet, but the story hasn't ended yet. The story, I think, is only beginning. And so increasingly, whether you're in mining, whether you're in construction, whether you're in fast-moving consumer goods, the marketplace is saying, we want to know what you stand for. If you remember, a few years ago, there was a lot of debate about genetically modified foods. And the marketplace said to FMCG companies, what is your view on FMCG, on genetically modified crops? And some companies will say, well, we guarantee that none of our food will have GM products in it. Well, quite frankly, that was a lie, because it's almost impossible. If you sell toothpaste, if you sell lipstick, if you sell makeup of any kind, there's going to be soy. And 96% of soy production in the world has all been genetically modified. So the marketplace is becoming wiser to the science of business, the stories that businesses tell, et cetera, et cetera. And then we add on the recent escalation in environmental disasters around the world, and people becoming way more actively engaged in all of these conversations. And of course, if you think back, folks, to the beginning of social media, all around the world, there were conferences based on the threat of social media, because indeed companies saw them as a threat. Why didn't we have conversations around the benefits of engaging with your marketplace real-time, 24/7 and globally? We would have thought differently if we just flipped the lens around through which we looked at many of these problems. And so I think there's increasing opportunity for companies to recognize the subtle but increasingly powerful shift in the position that ordinary customers, young people and older people, are taking, equipped with the tools of modern communication that enable them to mobilize support around the planet. If you take many of these platforms on which you can vote on important issues, like building a road through Tanzania, you might never have gone to Tanzania, to the Masai Mara or the Serengeti, but if you have a passion for wildlife, for animals, and for the wilderness, you will vote to support the cancellation of that road, if you like. And so we're all much more attuned to the issues around the world, and we're participating way more actively. I'd like to link that to one of my favorite stories around sort of corporate life, if you like, and talk about the story of Microsoft, which was one of the giants in the industrial age, absolutely massive. And recently watched a fascinating documentary on Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But Microsoft reached a point where its business model was stagnating. It had become completely dominant and ubiquitous, but increasingly difficult to make profits. The share price was declining significantly. And then an interesting thing happened. A new CEO was appointed. Satya Nadella joined as chief executive of global Microsoft. And the first thing he did is he fired all the corporate terrorists on his executive team. These are people that we say, folks, are those execs that nod and say yes in the boardroom, but when they leave, actively try and undermine your strategy for whatever reason they may have. So he removed that negative element in his executive team that always try and find a reason why something can't happen or try and stop something good from happening. What he then did is he aligned his leadership team around values and purpose. And he said, we will embrace this notion of servant leadership. We're there to serve the interests of our people and our customers and the world and our suppliers, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, he tweaked the technology platform and he tweaked the business model, and software as a service became much more prominent and dominant, et cetera. But Microsoft fortunes would, the change was triggered by a shift towards focusing on softer issues, on human issues, and on real values. And when he built that momentum up, Microsoft have reestablished themselves today as $1 trillion and one of the top 3 companies on the planet. But the catalyst for this huge change in fortune was, again, a focus on not the old business quantitative military style metrics, but on something way more aligned with goodness and with empathy and with real value. And so I think when we look at the future, we will realize that our children will think about success through a very different lens to the one that we use as investors or as analysts or as chief financial officers. I mean, let me ask you this question. How many of you have children, and how many of your children are dying to join your business, even if it's a family business? And it's really a starkly sort of illuminating question to ask yourself. Are your kids desperate to join your company? If your kids were the CEO, what would they do differently in your business? And if you said to your kids, how would you like me to measure my company's success in your world when you're an adult one day? What would their answer really be? And I think the shocking truth for most of us is that our kids would not use the same success metrics as we do. Now, folks, of course, we've spoken about sustainability. Now, in many organizations that do great things, sustainability has become a tick box item, right? We plant some trees, we give some poor kids school meals and school books, but we still pump toxic waste into the rivers. On average, we come back to zero, and we can carry on doing that, and so we call that sustainability. Is that really the way we think we will measure success in the future? Or do we have to rethink our business as what Raj Sisodia calls a firm of endearment? He's written an amazing book that examined, can companies make profit and be successful when they don't advertise aggressively? In other words, do a marketing campaign to pump their product down people's throats that may or may not need the product. Can companies that spend only 10% of their peer group still do better financially? Do companies that pay their staff higher wages still succeed financially? Do companies that pay their suppliers on really good terms? And it was fascinating recently, just a week ago, someone wrote an article that said major corporations now need more than ever to pay their suppliers in 7 days. Folks, let me ask you this question. How many of you know a multinational corporation that pays any supplier, large or small, within 7 days? It's almost unheard of. Large corporations, by and large, pay their suppliers on as long a term as possible. In one case, I've worked with a global giant that's paid us on 180 days. Why? Because they're trying to hold on to the cash to drive their quarterly profit numbers. What Raj Sisodia's book suggests is that companies can, in fact, make more profit when they pay their suppliers better, pay their staff better, look after their customers better. And interestingly, one of the reasons is that companies, particularly in America, don't sue firms of endearment. Why don't they? Because they love them. They believe in them. They align with their purpose statement and what they're trying to achieve in the world. And so they would absolutely never sue a company like that. On the other hand, when you look at Jim Collins's book that was written some years ago now, You're Good to Great, and he analyzed, how should you build a great organization? And for the most part, he focused on operational efficiency as the main driver behind greatness. And many of us have attended strategy sessions where we said, how do we make our company, ABC Incorporated, how do we go from good to great? Well, folks, the truth is, if you look at Jim Collins's examples that are quoted in his book today, I think more than 65 or 70% of them either don't exist or have failed miserably and are a mere vestige of their former great selves. Why? Because their focus was only quantitative and all about efficiency. It wasn't about building something that's good for the greater ecosystem. And so firms of endearment have massive customer loyalty, very little litigation. The employees love them. They deliver way more productivity than they're paid for every single month. And they're able to charge the marketplace a premium because there's this intangible benefit. If you look at the statistics on a 5, 10, 15, and 20-year view, the analysts, and these figures are updated through till 2017, but on a 20-year view, folks, in America, conscious companies that are firms of endearment that practice according to a more diversified set of value drivers deliver way more financial performance over any year that you can imagine. So significantly better than those that simply focus quantitatively. And so let's pause it at that point before we delve into our next chapter, which is all about technology.
Great, thank you, Anton. And it's interesting, you talked about Microsoft, and one of our panelists, I presume the panelist may indeed be working for Microsoft, made a point. He said Satya Nadella reshaped the company's mission, which now reads, to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. Notice the word technology isn't even in the mission. And doesn't that talk to the humanity, the humanness that we've been referring to all the time?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so their story now is, how do we unleash the inherent capability of every person on the planet to maximum levels? Boy, when I wake up in the morning and I'm feeling a little bit slow, that's a powerful statement for me to wake up to and get going.
Absolutely. Anton, you talked about young people, and certainly a number of our customers are now saying, well, help us understand what is the customer of the future, particularly post-COVID. What is that customer of the future going to look like? And one of the most powerful things I ever came across, we did a workshop, and one of the speakers said, find yourself what they called a reverse mentor. Find a young person, not your own child, preferably because of the parent-child dynamic, and ask that young person to describe what the world of the future looks like, and shut up and listen. Because young people have a perspective that certainly my generation with a bit of gray hair doesn't have. What do you think the role of young people is going to be in the future?
Well, I think, Neil, the answer is really, really simple. Young people are the future. In most parts of the world, certainly in Africa, Middle East, Asia, China, India, obviously, there are more young people than older people. So the young people really are the future. And what's really fascinating is that when you look at, let me actually answer this from the perspective of an older person. So how many of you have parents, and I'm purposefully saying not how many of you do this thing that I'm going to ask, but how many of you have parents that unwrap Christmas gifts really, really slowly to save the paper? And what they then do after they've admired the gift is they fold the paper and put it in the bottom drawer under a book so that they can reuse it, right? We all have parents like that, or we know someone, and hopefully you don't do it yourself. But the reason, folks, is that they grew up at a time of the Great Depression and the years surrounding that, when scarcity was the dominant word. And so a significant global event that happened when they were young and being molded, if you like, and shaped, a significant global event happened that shaped their behavior. That behavioral pattern has endured decades after the event that triggered it in the first place was no longer relevant. So we now live in a world of abundance. It's not necessary for any one of your parents any longer to save the paper, and yet they still do. And the important thing for us to realize is when we look at our own children, what are the big global events unfolding during their early formative years that will shape their sense of normal and their behavior for most of the rest of their lives? How will global events that are unfolding while they're young and being shaped, how will global events inform what they think is important and valuable going forward? And when we start having that conversation, we'll get an insight into what will shape value from their perspective in the future. I know certainly from my perspective, being locked down now for 7 weeks in the confines of, fortunately, a property with a bit of a garden I can get into. But even so, my sense of what's valuable in my life has already been shaped in only 7 weeks of COVID lockdown. At the same time, our young people have access to social media platforms, they have access to technology, they expect everything to happen immediately in the short term, hence Amazon's quest to deliver any product you order within 3 hours or 4 hours. And so for our young people to just accept, for example, the practical consequences of drone delivery, they won't even blink about it. What do? We still think about civil aviation, safety, regulatory frameworks, and the young folk just say, bring it on. I want it because I want it and I want it now. Because they're being shaped by these technological, societal, and other events that are unfolding during their formative years. So I think young folk, are the future. They think about what's valuable differently. And of course, we won't agree. We will think they're wrong, as our parents thought we were wrong. But at the core, some of those major impacts stay and drive their thinking and their behavior for years beyond COVID.
So the point is we have to listen to young people, which perhaps we're not doing very effectively in our companies right now. But Anton, here's a really interesting question that has emerged. You talked about the world of abundance, and you've just talked about, drone delivery and all sorts of things and things being available instantly. Isn't the major risk, the question is, that once the COVID lockdown ends, that we plunge straight back into the world of crass consumerism? That because we've been denied access to restaurants and shopping centers, that people just flood back and go back to exactly where we were before COVID. Isn't that a great risk?
Neil, I think it is a risk. I expressed a view a little while back that if the COVID impact is short-lived, if the world snaps back, after a month or two, then there is a high risk that we will just revert to type and go back to the old world. But the longer COVID continues, and again, I think COVID-19 is just one event. I strongly believe there will be a COVID-20 and 21 in the next 10 years. I think, unless we fundamentally, here's my favorite word again, recalibrate how we live, what we stand for, what we regard as valuable, I think that has to be a reality. And so the longer COVID-19 extends, the greater the disruption to the world, the greater the chance is that we do press pause and design a future for all of ourselves that's different. Now, that needn't be a future that's less valuable in a purely financial sense for organizations. Again, let's go back to firms of endearment and the quantitative research that proves that those firms have become much more valuable. So from a monetary point of view, it doesn't mean that we all suddenly are accepting of lower salaries, less value, less assets, etc. But I think how we engage is shifting. I've certainly seen amongst my circle of friends, and yes, that's one demographic only, but all of us are way more sensitive now to buying our produce for home delivery from the small local entrepreneur rather than from the big multinational. Unless it's a multinational that really resonates with the experiences and the fears and the concerns we're all feeling right now. So I'm not sure, Neil, that we will simply revert back. I think aviation, for example, will change forever. I think the world of energy was already on a path to changing. That path was constrained by the trillions of dollars invested in the carbon energy industry. I think it's been hastened by the COVID impact. So it might not snap into a different formula for energy over the next 6 or 12 months, but I certainly think that energy transition has been hastened by this event. I think the world of manufacturing, where we've recognized the need. Yes, globalization is good, and we do need to tap into centers of excellence, but there also does need to be a level of national and local resilience and dependence built into the system. So I think supply chains will change. I think the commercial model will change. The financial metrics, I think, will change. It makes it no less exciting. My view is that the world, for a leader that really gets this new future and positions their company accordingly, the world has actually never been more exciting. Scary as hell in the short term, absolutely.
It's interesting. I'm sure, Anton, I know that you've followed the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is probably the biggest survey on trust in the world. And the 2019 survey for me was absolutely fascinating. And this is a message for our business leaders listening in today. An overwhelming percentage of people interviewed said they want their business leaders, their CEOs, their C-suite executives to take responsibility, not just for the business, but for social issues. That change in the world needs to come out of the business community because governments are not doing it properly. So I think that's a powerful message that resonates there. Now we have a very practical question over here. And how do you see the restaurant and coffee shop business emerging after COVID? You and I are both lovers of restaurants and coffee shops.
Indeed. So it's one of my kind of personal success metrics, Neil. If I'm, if I'm enjoying really good food and drinking amazing coffee, life is always good. But absolutely fascinating. I think in the short term, again, as there is this global fear around, infection, the restaurant business model will need to change, will become more expensive because there simply will be fewer tables in a restaurant. I've seen images of sort of perspex glass boxes, almost like a greenhouse being built around individual tables in Holland, if you like. But I guess over time that will dissipate. But I think in the short term, eating out is going to become more expensive. I think that we are going to have to pay a higher price for lots of things, air travel being one of them, despite the reduction in the cost of fuel, obviously. I think, again, from a socializing point of view, humans are just social animals. We do want to aggregate. And it's fascinating to see in the South African lockdown sense, where we're only allowed to exercise between 6 and 9 in the morning, we have to keep 2 meters distance from everyone. You can only walk around in your neighborhood and you have to wear a mask. There's this urge for people to get out and talk, even if it means shouting across 2-meter distances, to engage and feel that energy exchange between humans. So I think from a socializing point of view, the need for restaurants or places where people can socialize together and enjoy a good meal will increase. But the practical side of how we do it is going to change the business model a lot. Interestingly, one of the most successful coffee shops in Cape Town at the moment is nothing other than a hole in the wall, literally a hole in the wall. It's about a 4 square meter coffee shop with literally a serving hatch in the wall, no seats. And everyone walks past in single file, grabs a coffee, walks across the road, sits 2 meters apart, and they're doing a I think they're doing their normal daily turnover in the 3 hours that they're allowed to be open only. So again, people crave that platform, that space to connect, to engage, to share stories, and it happens in meal places and coffee shops. I think it's going to continue. The model will change. You will rely on Mr. Delivery or Uber Eats. You will rely on frozen meals. For Mom's Day, Mother's Day, yesterday, I was able to order high tea from the chef in one of Cape Town's one of South Africa's most highly rated restaurants. He's now providing sort of home delivery of really boutique sort of products, and not inexpensively, I have to say. So already we're seeing the price of that go up. But the model will change. The need to socialize, the need to enjoy won't go away. How you deliver it, to whom and where, and at what price will all change.
Anton, another interesting question, and it relates to the concept of the model changing. How do businesses pivot? And I think perhaps the way to answer this question, I know you and I were both fascinated by a South African company called Granadella and how they actually pivoted as COVID bit into their business. Perhaps tell that story. It relates to business models changing.
It's a very interesting story, and it's a kind of a crazy one if you like to think about it. And one of our team members, Neil, used a wonderful expression on our meeting on Friday that says, pivot, don't panic. Now, this is a company, folks, that should really have panicked, because their name was Granadella, And what they did was sell swimming costumes, bathing costumes for men and women with motifs of granadillas on them and other fruits, as it happens. So you can imagine now we're in the summertime in South Africa, beautiful time for the beaches, and yet no one's allowed to go to the beach. So your entire business model erupts, right? It just collapses. No one's buying swimming costumes because they can't go to the beach, and very few people have swimming pools at home. So end of business, you would think. Excepting the leadership of Granadilla didn't panic, they pivoted. And literally within 4 days, I mean, I have to admire them, within 4 days, they started home deliveries of fruit and vegetables. Of course, in every box, there was a Granadilla. And with a little logo, with a little card saying, don't forget, you know, we're still around, we still love you, and we're still looking after what you need. But right now, that's home delivery of fresh fruit and vegetables. And they built a payment platform. They built a delivery partnership, which allowed them to pivot their business from bathing suits to vegetables in 4 days. I'm not sure there's a better example anywhere in the world of a pivot.
Absolutely perfect. Okay, let's move on, Anton. You AI and technology driving the core. I think, you know, that's the point. It is technology that's moving things. So let's hand back to you for the next session, please.
Thanks very much, Neil. So, folks, we started off by saying Jack Ma said it's not about the technology, and we've spoken a lot about many other things, but right now it is about the technology. And we all know that the world of smart machines, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, where we're placing increasingly small, cheap, but very smart sensors in almost everything around us. These sensors communicate, they collaborate, they're even programmable. So if you think of the old world, where if you wanted to understand what was happening in your business, you would have to put a sensor into something, an object, a machine or a truck or whatever it might be, transmit the data up through the cloud into the enterprise system, understand it, analyze it, make a change, and then transmit back down to the machine again to change behavior or an operating rule or whatever it might be. That world is now absolutely exploding in its exciting potential. Technology really is driving so much of what we can do. It doesn't affect the why and the how, but it does affect what we can do. And when you look at the world, a colleague of mine in Switzerland, Gerd Lennart, says we'll experience more change, folks, in the next 20 years than in the last 100 years. Well, maybe we've had a bigger shock in the last 3 months than in the last 100 years, perhaps. But nonetheless, we've only, the industrial age, you know, changed everything. And yet now we have these new technologies added to quantum computing that make what was impossible before absolutely possible. So if you look at this chart and you look at on the left-hand side of your image, you've got the era of change that was catalyzed or shifted by electricity, the automobile, and the telephone over a spread of 30, 40, or 50 or so years. But then shift your eyes, folks, to the right-hand side of that image, and you'll see the impact on the height of the height shows you the level of impact driven by these new technologies. And the width of the base of that spike is over a very much shorter space of time. So we've had a condensed timeline, but a massive impact on these new technologies. So how we think about energy, for example, has been shifted by battery storage. I mean, think about what Elon Musk did to the Western Australian government, who were suffering regular energy outages. And he said, I will build you a battery farm that will kick in a millisecond after your national energy grid goes down and allow your economy to operate. I will build it in 6 months, and if I don't, it'll be free. Never been done before, and he did it. And weeks after it was complete, under budget and under time, the energy grid fell down, and milliseconds later, a battery system maintained the capacity that the Western Australian economy needed to operate. That's changed the rules forever. And we know that the battery technology is changing almost on a quarterly basis. Then we get robotics and automated robotic processes. We get genome sequencing that understands the software behind human beings. We've got new technology to manage transactions, which is the digital ledger system, which we call blockchain, etc. Now, I don't, you know, it's a bit like Bitcoin, a digital form of money, if you like. I don't know, folks, whether Bitcoin will survive or not, and it's really unimportant. But what I do know is, and again, particularly post-COVID, the world will move away from cash more quickly now than ever before. I mean, cash has got to be the most unhygienic form of anything, right? We never know where it's been, who's touched it, et cetera, et cetera. So why would anyone want to handle a banknote again in the future? So digital currency, digital payment systems will require digital record-keeping systems. Whether it's blockchain or the successor to blockchain, I don't really know. But it's all happening over a very, very short space of time. So when you think about the world of artificial intelligence and how this is changing even geopolitical influence in the world, it's fascinating to look at which parts of the world, which countries are investing the most and making the most progress in the world of AI. And the scary thing, I guess, is for many is that China is massively out-investing and out-innovating the rest of the world. I mean, China, folks, as we know, have a social scoring system for every single citizen where 1.3 million people are tracked with cameras, with sensors, with surveillance technology, and with AI, and their movements are understood, their behavior is analyzed, and an AI ascribes a score to every single citizen, and that score determines whether you can get your kids into a good school, whether you can buy an air ticket or a train ticket, whether you're eligible for promotion, et cetera, et cetera. Now, on the one hand, we say, well, that's really, really scary, Anton, and even more, impresses on us the need for some form of control over our privacy rights, et cetera, et cetera. On the other side, I say, well, theoretically at least, is it so bad? Would we not create better citizens if we all had some form of influence in shaping people's behavior through a social scoring system driven by an AI? For me, I think we could gamify human citizenship quite effectively, actually. People would stop at stop streets or red traffic lights if there was a penal score to be added to their social score. The problem, of course, in China is that the algorithm that determines the score is in a black box, so no one understands which parts of the algorithm ascribe which weightings to which behaviors. So that's a real problem because you're being asked to play a game of rugby or soccer or football, but no one telling you what the rules are. And secondly, of course, there's no right of appeal. However, having said that, there's no arguing that AI, the ability of machines to interpret, to analyze, and to look for new answers has never been more exciting and more powerful than today. Again, the world order may well be shifting, and those that will be left behind will really, really have to play catch up. The truth is, folks, that we're all living in a world which is becoming increasingly interconnected and data-driven. If you think of supply chains, which are connected with smart sensors, these smart sensors are rapidly building the ability to collaborate with one another, to interpret each other's information, and to make business process decisions based on an interpretation and analysis of that real-time data, with no human intervention. Think of smart intelligence autonomous systems that understand and identify points of leverage, points of arbitrage, and create business flows with no human intervention. That's the world we're rapidly moving towards. And if you think of the global supply chain right now and how it's been disrupted in the COVID era, how much better could that not have been if this global intelligent self-operating system had already been ubiquitous around us? But of course, we're also reaching a world where even us individuals are becoming connected. So again, fueled by COVID, we're now talking about health insurance schemes urging their members to wear smart watches, which are tracking our body temperature, our pulse rates, our chemical imbalances, et cetera, feeding that information back into the healthcare system, all designed to make us more healthy. But where does it all stop? And let me just for a moment share with you this rather interesting but disturbing story about how connected human beings really are becoming and how we are going to become in the future integrated into this central global smart system.
Will you call me?
Sorry?
Will you call me?
You mean telephone you?
Yes.
Where?
Now.
But you're sitting right here.
This is why I wanted to have lunch. You just phone me? Now? Hello, Bethany speaking.
Hello?
You phoning for Bethany?
Yes. What are you doing?
This is Bethany. Can you hear me?
Well, you're right in front of me.
But can you hear me down the phone?
Oh my God.
This is me. On the phone, I had it implanted. My hand is the phone. I can walk and talk because I'm on the phone inside my hand. I am the phone. This is what phones are going to be from now on. I have integrated. Thank you for your call. Subdermal implants. They charge themselves with motion like a self-winding watch. And it's on the 22 network. I get signal across 95% of UK mainland, 98 by next year.
When I phoned you, it was ringing. You were ringing.
That's the speaker. So small.
Okay, but when did you get this done?
That course in Winchester, I had one finger done every night. I still need to use a handset to phone out. Look.
Hello?
Hi.
Okay, but look, I can't believe you had surgery without telling me.
Skin plants, not surgery, and I knew you'd be cross. But I'm 18, and you had that tattoo when you were 18, and it's the same sort of thing. And I wanted to ask you, will you do me a favor?
What?
Will you tell Dad?
Oh, sweet.
Please, will you tell Dad for me?
So, I'm not sure why the dads always have to be the sort of tough guys, but folks, we really are reaching a point, I think, and you know, Dr. Vivian Ming, one of the world's top AI specialists in San Francisco, says by 2025, it will be possible to embed a small microchip into the brain of every person at birth with all the world's data given to them from day one. Now, that might sound really, really scary. And, you know, obviously in the beginning, it will be a little bit more expensive, but ultimately that could become ubiquitous and accessible for everybody. Why are we so scared of that prospect? Because right now we all carry a microchip with all the world's information next to our ear. It simply has a silver case and a battery packed around it. So we really are reaching a point, I think, in the next 10 years or so where everything in this world is connected. And so back to COVID-19. Using AI, and I've already told the story earlier this morning, in China right now, the government is able to trace every single person, your health data, your social contact data, your physical whereabouts, and monitor where you're going, are you allowed to be there, given your state of health, etc., etc. And it's all happening. We know the story of some companies that have installed tracker software on their employees' computers, so that they can virtually check whether every employee is at their desk working remotely every 10 or 15 minutes. Invasive? Absolutely. Issues around privacy and control? No question about that. But let me remind us, folks, you know, many years ago, we had the invention of test tube babies. And the world was up in uproar about humans' ability to create a human being in a test tube, literally. And that was 20 or 30 years ago. Today, that's just, you know, it happens in hospitals all around the world, in every single country on the planet. So we have this ability to adapt, to adjust, and to build rules and regulations in which help us get through the noise. I think as a consequence of COVID in particular, the notion of individual privacy is something that's going to rapidly disappear. I think it'll be the preserve of the ultra wealthy, maybe even that are able to escape this constant connectedness, constant data exchange, and global awareness about what's happening in the system. So get ready, folks, for a world in which every one of our moves all the time will be located. Now, there are many benefits to this, of course. One of the life insurers and health insurers in South Africa now tracks your activity, even in the home context where you can't go to a gym and swipe your access card. But if you're wearing a smartwatch connected into their system, into their algorithm, they can now track remotely whether you're doing your daily exercise, whether you're sitting in the sun sufficiently, and whether that impacts on your personal health. So the world of individual action being under the radar screen will disappear. Again, couple that with a world where physical cash disappears, where there will be a digital ledger tracking every single financial transaction. Think about what that does to eliminating corruption and crime around the world. So not all of these will be negative and bad. Many positive social consequences will emerge from all of this. Let's pause at that point, folks. I'm sure there are one or two compelling questions around privacy. I'll see if I can answer them or not. And then we'll delve into our final chapter for this morning.
Yeah, I think, Anton, the whole question of privacy is something that terrifies people. Artificial intelligence frightens people, and you put the two concepts together. I'm sure you've seen the Israeli historian Yuval Harari talked about, the surveillance as potentially a positive thing, but he talked about a line being crossed and what he called surveillance inside the body. The idea of having a microchip which enables us to measure somebody's temperature, to measure their heartbeats, whatever it might be. And that's crossing a line in his perspective, that suddenly you're able to surveil inside the human body. Now, in times of COVID, that's fantastic. You can measure people's temperature from afar. You can pick up infection early. But do we trust our governments to manage that data?
Neil, you've really used the most important word of all there, and the word is trust. So I remember a session we ran with one of the biggest drinks companies in the world, if you like, and the question is all around exactly this: if there's a chip in your body able to measure sugar content of what you're consuming, indeed your entire health, why would you not share this data with that company or any other company for that matter, your health insurer, whoever? Why would you not share the data if the data is used to design a product customized for you and your body and your nutritional requirements at that moment on that particular day, and then enable that company, if they could build the systems, to deliver to you exactly what you needed to optimize your health in that 24-hour window? And the question is, would you trust that they would use your personal data for your personal benefit rather than for their profit and quarterly sales targets? The same thing with government. Will we trust the government giving access to our information? Will they use it for the right purpose? And so we think about the whole ecosystem of global regulatory framework around every single industry. In the old world, the regulations that govern businesses and industries and health systems, etc., was all built around regulations that say you may do this and you may not do that. And subparagraph 13.3.2.bis determines this is what you have to do. I think with the speed with which the world is changing, that way of regulating is outdated and can't keep up with where the world actually is. So the whole regulatory world needs to shift towards a principles and values-based system for regulating behavior, a system of principles which keeps pace with the rate of technological change and human adoption of these new technologies. It will also capture or assist governments in defining rules which their citizens can understand, if they're transparent, if they communicate it really well, and if they again advance the nation state towards a story which individual citizens buy into. What is the purpose of a nation? And if that purpose is the pinnacle and everyone gets that, then the values and principles governing how the government can use information to advance the stated and accepted purpose of a country or a region or a business, people will buy into relinquishing their control over their personal data. And of course, one of the principles should be, Neil, that if you transgress or break one of those basic fundamental values, that the individual can then reassume control over their data, remove it or delete it out of the system. So you've all seen how Google has had to adapt now and give their users way more control over your personal data. And you can now determine whether I put it into the system or I extract it and blank it off from the system. Now, why would you blank it off? It's because you don't trust the system to act in your best interests. And again, I think this is one of those key features that will come out of the world. Young people feel very strongly about this. Again, the power of the youth coming through the global system. But governments will realize that people will hack the system. People will find ways around the system at some point. Right now, they may be constrained, but at some point, there will be a digital revolution, if you like, if companies and governments breach that, the ethics and principles of why I'm giving you my data in the first place.
Right, Anton, I've got one quick question, which I'd like you to answer briskly, please, before we move on to the final session. And another, again, it's a very practical business question. It's good to have these. What skills do you believe are going to be relevant and which skills are going to be irrelevant in a post-COVID world?
So, very broad question. I'll try and answer it as succinctly as I can. If you can tell me what you do every day, then your skills are going to become sooner or later irrelevant. Because if you can tell me procedurally what you do every day, those steps will probably be capable of automation and will be done by a robot or a smart machine. If what you do every day is very difficult to describe, is intangible, then those skills will remain relevant. So immediately you can say that all soft emotional engagement skills, we used to call them EQ, Jack Ma talks about LQ, which is the love quotient. In other words, your ability to engage at a human level, to amplify human attributes in others, which is empathy, passion, excitement, curiosity, innovation, etc., serendipity. Those skills, a machine, at least in the foreseeable future, will not be able to replicate. Everything that can be automated in the future absolutely will be. So we will have to redefine that human overlay that adds value to something. Even coding. Right now, everyone should learn to code, not because coding is going to be a future relevant skill, but because you need to understand how algorithms work so that you can question and challenge with your human creative mind that which the AI can't do. So an AI, for example, can't recognize, emotional insights, if you like. It will only analyze ones and zeros and come up with a logical sequential answer. So coding is a skill right now valuable, but not because it will help you build a future relevant career. And I think that, Neil, would be a succinct summary. If you can think of a step, an admin process, if you like, if your job is to analyze Excel spreadsheets, you will be replaced. If your job is to ask the business strategy questions around the bottom line in Excel, that the AI is not going to be able to do in the future.
Yeah. Our colleague, Dr. Vivian Ming, whom you mentioned, very often talks about the word mystery, that human beings are capable of mystery, of exploring the unknown, whereas machines are extremely good at exploring the known. And I guess that's the line that's drawn between the two of them. Anton, Let's go back to your final session, Strategy from the Future. We hand the screen back to you.
Great. Neil, just before I do that, I thought of one other really good skill and that I think is so important. And I'm not sure how many of us parents actually help our kids develop these skills, but it's the skill of entrepreneurship, the ability to spot a gap and deliver a value or a need to someone at a price that's agreeable at a moment in time. That spirit of entrepreneurship, something I think, creativity, curiosity, etc. Really, folks, that's where the focus needs to lie. And so flowing from that is, how do we develop then as business leaders and as parents a strategy from the future rather than from the past? And I recall the many nights I used to spend with my parents having a cup of tea at 9 o'clock at night before they would retire and discussing my career, what subjects I should do at school, what courses I'm doing at university, etc., etc. And if you really wanted to be aspirational way back then, and it is many decades ago, I have to confess, it was all about the known professions, the engineers, the doctors, the lawyers, and so forth, the architects and so on. But really the question is, let's propel ourselves into a world of 2030. Imagine what that world looks like, and then talk about how do we develop a strategy. And the challenge really, Neil, is that every one of us is on a path, individually and as a business. We have what we call the current future. But the truth is that while we're sitting having this conversation, market forces are playing out that are shaping that future, and we've tried to address a number of those today. We tend to see those through the red lens of danger, and we tend to focus on how they're going to make our business plan more difficult to achieve. And because we're not stupid, we innovate. But the truth is, folks, write down every innovation in your business over the last 3 years. How many of those were truly transformational, and how many of those were incremental and evolutionary? And again, just judging from my own conversations with leaders around the world, the vast majority of in-business innovations over the recent past are all incremental, small business optimization improvements. Those, by the way, are crucially important, but they deliver nothing other than really the business of today that's able to survive and make the next year. What we really need to be doing is looking at the things we've been discussing today through the green lens of opportunity to see how they shape a very different future. A marketplace which has changed, where customers value different things, where we need to reinvent what it is that makes our business relevant and powerful in that context. And this requires really courageous, brave leadership thinking. And it's that thinking, Neil, where we start thinking about the digital form of our existing business in every single dimension. How can we shift from a linear sales forecast, which in an old world, we used to take last year's performance plus 5% and settle on 4% after 6 months of arguing? How do we 3x? How do we 5x our business? And when you set your leadership teams the challenge of 3xing next year's turnover in a turbulent world, they realize they can't think in the same way. They've got to reinvent completely. And that's when we start building the business of tomorrow through a strategy perspective, when we imagine the potential through a future lens and then work back to the present. It's really important to do this because we know that capital markets, investors of the world, are increasingly penalizing companies that are heavily reliant on hard physical assets. And they're increasingly rewarding companies whose business model revolves around ideas, creativity, and execution skills. In other words, intangible features and benefits in an organization. When you start moving towards capital markets in more detail, we in future will talk about what is the market's expectation of your future profitability. In other words, do I rate you and your leadership as creative, imaginative, innovative, and can you actually execute on your crazy ideas exponentially? If we think the answer to that question is yes, we rate you, you have a high level of expectation premium. In other words, the capital markets reward you in the value of your company stock based on your ability to innovate into the future. And so when you look at organizations through a set of complicated metrics that we have built to analyze these organizations, you see companies like Tesla, for example, Amazon and Alibaba, or Tesla and Amazon with massive innovation premiums. In other words, these companies are able, the market believes that they will innovate significantly in the future. In Amazon's case, $120 billion worth of future market value is unrelated to their cash flow today. It's all related to the market's belief that Amazon will keep innovating and stay relevant in the future. Whereas when we look at other companies, Shell is a classic example there. The market is penalizing them because it says, you Shell right now, based on what we see around your balance sheet and your leadership and your strategy, you're actually worth more dead than alive. In other words, let's buy you now, let's break you down, and the individual parts are worth more individually than the sum of the whole. And then the leadership team are under massive pressure to change the way they think about creating their business that's future relevant rather than based in lessons from the past. And of course, Elon Musk, again, is that lovely example which we love to talk about and quote. And the classic one is when he revealed his new cyber truck. I mean, this thing is called, the best description I've ever heard is it's an angry triangle, right? It's a crazy looking vehicle. Who in their right minds would present that as your next big innovation? Well, he did, folks, because he simply believes that you need to think differently to everybody in the industry. And when you look at the industry players and how they innovate, look at all the motor vehicle models on that chart. And then look down to the bottom right-hand corner and you'll see something which you'll not recognize. And that's the Elon Musk angry triangle truck of the future. And of course, we all know that he was able to sell more than 500,000 of these really ugly looking vehicles before they'd even launched the first one. I don't think Toyota, I don't think Mercedes-Benz, I don't think BMW, I don't even think Ferrari is able to do that, to just shatter the way everyone else thinks. And I'm reminded, Neil, when I joined the financial services business many years ago, it was just beyond startup phase. But everyone in the industry said, what you guys are trying to do is impossible. And you know what, Neil, for 7 or so years, we made impressive tax losses. They were almost right. But we truly believed that we wanted to do something so different that the industry players couldn't recognize it. And 7 years later, that became the industry standard. I suspect that the utility vehicle of 2030 will look way more like Elon Musk's angry triangle than any Toyota or Ford truck ever built. And so, folks, where you really want to innovate your business and make it relevant for the world post-COVID in 2030, don't worry about the competition. If the competition look at your strategy and say, wow, that makes real sense, then I suspect you've missed the point. You need to go and rethink it so that it's not obvious to everyone in your industry as to what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're going to succeed in it. And so too, folks, I want you from this session onwards never ever to use the word best practice again, because it's a trap. When you try and embrace the notion of best practice, it means you've spent 6 months analyzing who else in the world is doing what. You've aggregated that into an average. You've said that's the best example going forward. Then you procure the budget in your business, and then you ask your teams to go and implement what the best players were doing at least 9 or 12 months ago. And by the time you've reached that point, they've moved on way well beyond you. So global best practice, I think, has become shattered in this new world post-COVID as we shift towards 2020. Remember, folks, that global best practice didn't get the designers of the Titanic anywhere other than the bottom of the ocean. So in this new world, it's imperative that you as leaders really embrace credible, deeply well thought through innovative thinking and implement it faster and better than anyone else in the world, and let them try and come and copy you in the future. It means that we have to take different decisions to generate relevant business post-COVID. So in the future, folks, when you take any business decision in your company, whether you're a coffee shop, a restaurant, a manufacturer, or an airline, ask yourself these 5 questions. Firstly, does this decision deeply and profoundly and emotionally affect our customers? Oops, apologies. Our customers, let me just go back there. One more. I pressed my finger slipped. Let's just do this. If you'll bear with me, and we'll go there and there. Apologies for that. So does this decision deeply support both our customers and our talent in the organization? Second question, in the short term, remember, it is all about survival in the early months of COVID. Does it improve my cash and liquidity? Thirdly, to build this foundation for how we propel ourselves into the future, does this decision enhance our move towards digitization and automation in every single aspect of our business? Again, even if I'm a coffee shop, even if I'm a restaurant, what is the data that you need in your restaurant to build a better value proposition for your customers in a world that will see environmental disasters, COVID-20, COVID-21, where you need to get closer to and understand your individual customers better? Fourthly, is this decision deepening the relationships between my business, my customers, and the entire ecosystem of suppliers? Remember, in the old world, we used to call that the supply chain. And most importantly, perhaps, when anyone reads this decision, will they get goosebumps of anticipation? Will the decision be so exciting, so compelling, so important that anyone who reads of your leadership decision, will they get excited to see you execute that and for them to experience the practical outcome of your decision? Folks, if you can't answer positively to at least 3 of those 5 questions, please don't take that decision. It's as simple as that. So in summary, let's just revisit a few key features. Number 1, folks, think very differently as a leader. The thought processes, the rules, the experiences of your past life have all, or vast majority of them, been shattered by this short era that we've just experienced. Imagine your ideal future in 2025 or beyond. What would that look like? And imagine that future unconstrained by your present structure, your present products, your present business model, or your present people. Imagine your ideal future. Get deeply excited by that. Wake up in the morning and say, wow, we've done it, it's real. And then look back to May the 11th, 2020, and ask yourself the question, what did we do in June, July, and August 2020 that started this journey that landed up with this incredibly exciting outcome 5 years from now? Thirdly, automate and digitize as rapidly, as broadly as you possibly can. Create new ways for your employees to stay relevant in a world of almost permanent remote work, a world where we will come to office buildings to socialize, probably more than do work. So help your people stay relevant in that world. Think about the second order implications of remote work and make it exciting and valuable for the people. We cannot escape this shift towards green and circular economies. We've realized the global system of business is so fragile, we've never built in adequate resilience. Again, the part of greedy capitalism, because we weren't able to carry stock to build in a buffer against unexpected surprises. What COVID has taught us is there will be increasing unexpected surprises ahead in the next 10 years. Let's prepare for them before we're confronted by them. Folks, in the advent of technology, AI, etc., build deep humanness into yourself as a leader. Become a human. The fourth industrial revolution was about digital transformation. The fifth industrial revolution must be about rehumanizing humans. And then please think through how your children would want you to measure your business and your personal success by. What are those features? Profit is obviously one of them. At the end of the day, we do have to reward shareholders, the providers of capital, the innovators, the risk takers, and the wealth creation. But that can't be at the expense of everything else in the system called life post-COVID. In the past, folks, we looked for experts. And in the future, as Dr. Vivian Ming says, as leaders, we all have to become problem explorers. We have to become creative, agile, adaptive problem explorers. We won't always know the right answer. We won't always be able to hire people with all the answers. We need people to explore the questions. And finally, folks, as humans, we need to explore this future, whatever it may bring. And anyone who tells you that they know what the future post-COVID will be lying to you. Please don't listen to them or follow them. But let's explore the potential and the possibilities of this vastly different and unknown future, but with human spirit, creativity, and excitement. No AI can do that. It can only analyze ones and zeros and come up with logical interpretations. The magic must happen through us. Folks, the future is indeed ours. Let's please enjoy that future tremendously. Before I play my final closing sequence, we have a few more moments for a final Q&A on this section. And then, Neil, I'll run the closing video.
Right, Anton, thank you very much. And we do have a question, which is a tremendously relevant question. With the major push to automation and digitization, what happens to the so many unemployed people in the world? And how does this conflict with the idea of humanness? How do we become human if we're busy laying off people and replacing them with machines?
Neil, I think the answer to that's already been born. The debate has started around basic universal income around the world. It's just a fundamental truth that many roles that humans fulfilled will become either irrelevant or they will be automated, mechanized, etc. So that's the truth. And so the debate has started. There have been many experiments. And again, I think what COVID is going to show us is that hundreds of millions of jobs post-COVID won't return. The debt built up in the world markets will mean there's going to be a massive focus around, reclawing some of that equilibrium back in the world. And I suspect we will find that many things that people did simply weren't necessary, weren't valuable. So it then takes us into a debate around what becomes valuable for a human. I spoke to one CEO recently, Neil, you'll know who I'm talking about. He said, in this COVID world of Zoom meetings, etc., I feel much more connected to my people because I'm talking to them face to face, albeit through a screen. I'm not sitting in endless board and committee meetings. Those will all disappear. Right? So we reinvent the role of what it means to be a valuable person in a system called life and business. We will, I think, revert to valuing nurses and teachers more than highly paid soccer players in the future. That world of ascribing value to certain activities will change. We will invent many new roles for humans to do, caring for older people, caring for younger people and helping them explore with curiosity and excitement. Many, many new roles, many new technology-based roles, new businesses that will emerge that don't exist today. But overall, I think the global system is in, again, for a Ctrl+Alt reboot of what's valuable and how do we provide for the basic needs of 7.5 billion people around the planet so that they don't have to worry about a plate of food. I think what the COVID crisis has shown us that there's way more people in the world, again, with no buffer, no resilience to cope with the unexpected. Health systems around the world, feeding schemes around the world, unemployed people around the world. This COVID crisis has shown us just how badly we do need to calibrate the system of value being equated to a job, being equated to a salary. That triangle needs to shift completely.
Massive, massive questions for business leaders to think about and for them to step forward and take a role in shaping this new world. Anton, let's go. We're right on time. Let's play the final video and wrap the session up. Over to you.
Folks, thanks very much. Again, the message, the future is what we make of it. It will be determined by the decisions that you as leaders make in the next weeks and months or years ahead. It's potentially very exciting, challenging, no doubt. But let's make sure, folks, that the future is a matter of our choice and not a matter of chance.
Climate change,
deadly earthquake,
a suicide bomber,
terrorism,
nuclear device in the heart of the nation's capital.
It's no wonder that we're pessimistic. It's no wonder that people think that the world is getting worse. But perhaps that's not the case.
Perhaps we forget that we've only just begun.
Doing what's never been done before is intellectually seductive, whether or not we deem it practical.
What we're seeing is unfathomably new possibilities all of a sudden becoming available to us.
The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave.
You have to trust in something. Your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever.
We truly are living in an extraordinary time. And many people forget this.
So now technically your device is on. Can you tell? Can you hear me?
The yearning to do what we do in the service of something larger than ourselves.
Where did we come from? Are we alone in the universe? What is the future of the human race?
When you conduct those exercises, innovation follows just as day follows night.
We can do this.
I know we can because we've done it before.
Stay hungry, stay foolish.
Folks, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed our session. It's been great chatting with you, and I wish you all well.
I think, stay hungry perhaps is a slightly sinister message at the moment, but stay foolish is such a wonderful concept that we have to open our minds to a world of infinite possibilities. Folks, thank you very, very much. We're going to wrap it up exactly as we said now at 11 o'clock. We will be sending out a follow-up message to you all, to the participants. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we're going to invite you to join into this journey. We're going to create a kind of a board or a panel of executives who will regularly get together and explore these ideas. This is only step one. So look out for the notifications from Flume, from Future World. And again, it's been an enormous pleasure hosting you today. And we wish you all well as you go into the day and the months ahead. Thank you all, and goodbye.